All right, so today we're going to talk about estimating square roots. I know there's a lot going on today and stuff like that. We've got to kind of cram our lessons together. So for this first part, don't worry about writing this down. We're just kind of going to talk about it a little bit and then we'll get into our actual practice with it. If you want to write this down later, that's totally fine, but for right now, we're just going to talk about it. So up until now, we've just been talking about perfect squares and perfect square roots. But perfect squares are not the only squares out there. We can also estimate imperfect squares by using a number line. So first, let's pause, and we're going to talk about this word imperfect. So if you look at the beginning of it, it has this prefix im. Does anybody know what im means when it's prefix? It means not. So not all of our squares are perfect. Not all of our square roots are perfect, and that's what we're going to talk about today. They are considered to be not rational because they're really decimals that do not repeat and they do not terminate. Some of you guys might have seen the movie The Terminator. I haven't seen it, but the Terminator, he ends things. So when you see that word terminate, that means in math, that means that things end. So the decimal 0.5, that terminates, that stops, that ends. But the decimal 0.3 repeating, that keeps on going forever and ever and ever and ever. That does not terminate. That does not end. It goes on forever. Again, like we just talked about up here, we use the word non-terminating. Non-terminating to describe decimals that do not end, like we talked about up there. 0.3, that does not end. That keeps on going forever and ever and ever. But the decimal point, 0.5, that's it. There's nothing else after it. It stops. So to get into estimating, where imperfect squares and square roots are going to be on our number line, we want to think about these number lines with their perfect square roots with them. So we know 1 is the square root of 1, 2 is the square root of 4, 3 is the square root of 9, and so on and so forth for this whole number line. Remember, you do get your calculator for this, so if you don't have them memorized, that's okay. That's okay. You will get things done faster, and it will make your life a little bit easier if you have some of them memorized. But you don't have to, because you get your calculator on that. Well, 16 is where I forget. That's 256. 17 is 289. 18 is 324. 19 is 361. And 20 is the square root of 400. All right, I'm going to pause this video so that you get a second. Get those copied down in your notes for today. Okay, so now that we have all of our perfect squares on there, we can talk about some imperfect squares. Where might some other ones go? So I know that 1 is the square root of 1. I know 2 is the square root of 4. So that means somewhere in there, I'm going to have the square root of 2 and the square root of 3, because 2 and 3 are in between 1 and 4. Between 9 and 16, I'm also going to have the square root of 10, the square root of 11, the square root of 12, the square root of 13, the square root of 14, the square root of 15. All of those square roots are going to be in between 3 and 4. The words that we typically use are going to be in between, what numbers, but the fancy math word that they're going to use, or that you're going to see when they say in between what numbers, you're usually going to see between what consecutive integers. Between what consecutive integers are these numbers? So that vocabulary word consecutive, that means side by side, right next to each other. So if I'm looking at the square root of 13, and I say between what two consecutive integers is the square root of 13, I'm looking for these regular numbers here, these integers. So between what two numbers is the square root of 13? You would say 3 and 4. You would say 3 and 4. Somebody tell me a square root that would be between 9 and 10. If my square root's between 9 and 10, that means it needs to be between the square root of 81 and the square root of 100. So go ahead and put in the chat some square roots that would be between 81 and 100. An example would be the square root of 90, because 90 is between 81 and 100, so that means the square root of 90 is between 9 and 10. Okay. We're going to do a few of these examples together, and then we're going to talk about it when we've got our calculator. So, our first number, the square root of 10, between which two integers? Remember, we're usually going to see that word consecutive. Again, consecutive means side by side. Between which two consecutive integers would you find the following numbers? So the square root of 10. Again, we have to use our square roots and what we know about square roots to figure out where's 10 going to be. What's it going to be between? Is the square root of 10 between 1 and 4? Mm-mm. Is 10 between the square root of 4 and the square root of 9? Mm-mm. We see the square root of 10 is between 9 and 16, like we saw right here. So that means the answer I would want to give are 3 and 4. The square root of 10 will be between 3 and 4. It's going to be between 3 and 4. So now I've pulled up my Desmos calculator. What does this look like on the calculator? So on my calculator, I'm going to want to click this button here. This is my square root button. Let me point that out to you one more time. Right here. Oh, why is my clicker not going? Sorry, let me fix this. So when I click right here, that's my square root button. And then I type what I want it to be. So I would type the square root of 10. And it tells me over here on the right side of my calculator that it's approximately equal to 3.1622. Blah, blah, blah. Again, this decimal, because it's not a perfect square root, it does not terminate, it does not stop, and it does not repeat. It's just a bunch of ugly numbers right after each other. On that calculator, it looks like it stops, but that's just an estimate. That's just an estimate. If I type it on my phone, I get an even different number. So here's my calculator on my phone. I want to do the square root of 10. So I type 10. Oops, there we go. And then I hit my square root button. And see, it still has that 227766, but it keeps on going. It doesn't stop. And again, this is rounded. It's not the actual number. So with my decimal, I see that it's 3 point something. So that means on my number, because it's my number line, because it's 3 point something, that means it's between 3 and 4. Let's go on and look at the next one. We have the square root of 80. Again, two ways we can look at this. We can look at our number line, and we see where is the square root of 80 going to fall. I'm going to pause the video, take a second, and you tell me, where do you think the square root of 80 is going to fall? Between which two numbers? Okay, it's not between 1 and 4. It's not between the square root of 4 and the square root of 9. I got to keep going here a while. At 8, I see the square root of 64. At 9, I see the square root of 81. That's really close. And then at 10, I see the square root of 100. So if I'm trying to find the square root of 80, what's that going to be between? Is it between 8 and 9, or is it between 9 and 10? Let's check our calculator to find out. If I bring my calculator back, I delete. Again, the button for square roots right here. The square root button's right there of 80. And I see it's 8.9442791. 8.9, let me slide this over. 8.944, blah, blah, blah. So 8.9, is that between 8 and 9? Or is that between 9 and 10? That's going to be between 8 and 9. It's not quite 9 yet. It's just a little bit smaller than 9. So the square root of 80 is going to be like right there, so close to 9. That's where we're going to see the square root of 80. All right, the last one, I'm going to have you try all on your own. This one is the square root of 20. Oh, 200, I'm sorry. The square root of 200. Go ahead, pause your video. Use the number line or use the calculator, whatever you're comfortable with, and figure out between which two numbers is the square root of 200 going to be. Okay, so again, I look at my number line. I've got the square root of 20, or 200. Why do I keep saying 20? I don't know. I'm going to look at my square roots. Ooh, I see 196 and 225. 196 and 225. So that means the square root of 200 is going to be somewhere between 14 and 15. And if you use the calculator route, I've got the square root of 200, and I see that that's approximately equal to 14.1421, blah. So sometimes they'll ask you what two integers is it between, and sometimes they might ask you another question. They say, is it going to be closer to which number? So if I look at the square root of 10, that's about 3.16. Is it going to be closer to 3, or is it going to be closer to 4? The square root of 10, 3.1, that's going to be closer to 3. Closer to 3 on the number line. Like we saw here, it's right next to 3. 4 is really close to 15, so 3 is closer to the square root of 10. The square root of 80, remember that was between 8 and 9. Our decimal approximation was 8.94 something. Is that going to be closer to 8 or closer to 9? That's closer to 9. Like we said, it's right next to 81, so it's going to be closer to 9. And then our last one, 14.14. You tell me, type in the chat, is that going to be closer to 14 or 15? That's going to be closer to 14. Nice job. So remember, we're going to be having a formative over this. You can use your notes to help you study, But we suggest that on your formative, don't do it with your notes. You can use your calculator. Use your calculator to help you, but no notes because you need to see what you need to study up on before you take your summative test. If you have questions, let us know and good luck today.